I'm delighted that you've chosen to have lunch with Ben Selwyn and I today. Can I introduce Ben for you, and Ben will wave. Hello. What a delight to have you all on board. We've got some pretty amazing people who've logged on today, so thank you to all of you. Can I issue a warm welcome to a couple of people? I think Pete Rogers, one of our previous board members, is on, as is Bob Patterson, a former AAA president. I think industry legend Morris Donovan has joined us. That's exciting. John Benson, one of our current AAA board members. Glenn Payne, who's one of the directors of the Auto Innovation Centre. And I think Arnold Mao, the chair of our automotive products manufacturers, is online. So it's very exciting. I hope Michelle from Blackwood Diamond is on, excuse me, because that's one of my favourites. So welcome to everyone. Excuse me. Well, let's get started, Ben, shall we?
Yep, sounds good. Cool, thank you, Leslie. And yeah, look, let's jump into it. So just to start off with, there we go. As Leslie was saying, I mean, for me, there's some familiar faces on the list as well. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm one of the directors at ACA Research. We work closely with the AAA on their market intelligence services. And so for those of you who've fired questions through to them about what's going on in the car park or some of those sorts of topics, generally they end up on my desk or one of my team. And so, yeah, we're obviously looking at a whole bunch of different data sources when we're pulling that information together and keeping an eye on what's going on. And look, also, you know, obviously work more broadly across the sector. So I've been drawing on a whole range of those different topics in terms of today, of just going back and saying, well, look, really weird year last year, you know, what happened, what did we see, and what do we think might be coming in the year ahead? So without further ado, few topics or a few areas that we're going to cover off today. As Leslie said, we're going to do that in the 20 minutes, so we've got time for questions and so that we can finish up and grab a bite to eat ourselves. But for me, firstly, looking back at the year we just had, you know, what are some of the trends that we saw, and particularly looking at new vehicle sales there and how they were impacted and what that means. Then looking at the year ahead and saying, well, okay, 2021 is, you know, we are now into 2021. How is this changing? What do we see happening over that next, you know, probably 6 to 12 months? And then also looking beyond that and saying, well, okay, we do need to think about that sort of longer term future and what sort of shifts we're going to see and when we might see them. And that's the important part. So that I'll be talking to there. Now, obviously, that's all giving you a whole bunch of information. From your perspective, it's really important to understand how you can use that information. So at that point, Leslie's going to jump back in and just talk through some of the ideas as to, you know, knowing all of this, what can you actually take away? And you know, if you're in a workshop or that sort of environment, what might you be able to do in terms of using that? And as it says there, finishing off with some questions. So let's jump in. The year we had, well, looking at new car sales, 2020 was a really tough year. First time in a few years that we were below 1 million new vehicles sold. So, you know, obviously challenging from that perspective. Yeah, given lockdowns, given people who are on reduced incomes and all of those sorts of issues, then that makes sense from a business perspective as well. You know, obviously a lot of businesses that were doing it tough. Now, not all of them, and that's something that I will be talking to, but in a lot of cases, that need for government support and that level of government intervention. So people were putting off some of that spending, and new vehicles, you know, are often sitting more in that discretionary pile. And so people put a hold on that. Now, with that said, though, if we look at December, or sorry, that final quarter, what you can see is it did start to pick up. And so, again, that's really interesting because that talks to what we're going to see over this coming year. And again, I'll be coming back to that. But I mean, look, definitely setting the scene, very strange year and a tough year. And look, this is one of, you know, many different business metrics that I could look at and say, you know, 2020 was just real tough. Key point there, though. That pain, and again, talking about our new car sales, it wasn't evenly shared. And so what we see is you know, if you look at the map here and my nice, you know, very simple depiction of what went on in Australia, but Victoria and Tasmania, I'll say arguably that, you know, the two states that were most significantly impacted by lockdowns in terms of what went on were the two that were most significantly impacted in terms of those vehicle sales. And so, you know, just really a reflection of what went on, and the fact that we did see across the, you know, the research that we ran for the AAAA mid last year, it was the impact in terms of workshop revenue really varied depending on where they were in the country. So Victoria, Tasmania really hit. Coming up the East Coast, so New South Wales less so. There was an impact early on, but there was a recovery that kicked in pretty early in the year. Similarly for you know, Queensland, South Australia, Northern Territory, smaller markets, but also at that similar sort of level. They were hurt, they were down, but they weren't down as badly as you know, those other two. And Western Australia is the other outlier. Now, you know, obviously the ones who sort of got a handle on things pretty early, and albeit there's been some, you know, a few hiccups since then, the impact, I mean, almost a nominal impact. So, you know, down 3% on the 2019 vehicle sales numbers. I mean, that's very, very close. I mean, as I say, I mean, really, I say, looking at that and saying there's a lot of businesses, and even early on, we saw a lot of businesses who were saying that their revenue numbers were unaffected. They were as busy as or busier than they'd been prior to COVID. On the positive side, we did see some winners. Now, as you can see here, I've pulled out some of the brands that probably do sit at the smaller end of the market. I could have got up there and talked about how Toyota had another really strong year. But, you know, if they're selling a couple of 100,000 cars a year, well, okay, they're pretty strongly positioned to begin with. Whereas what we saw at the lower end of the market, and I've pulled out these three brands as being three Chinese owned ones who have been pushing aggressively into the Australian market and have been having, as you can see, a significant amount of success, albeit so in some of those cases, and Haval in particular here, coming from a really low base. But they have been able to grow sales really well through COVID. And so where for these businesses, and I mean, a comment that applies more broadly is where there is an offer that is, you know, does line up with consumer demand, it's well priced, and obviously they're all coming in very much in that value space and you know, making it as easy as possible for people to buy, that is still something they're going to jump on board with. Now, with these, as you can see from the cars that I've got on the screen there, it's also a comment on the, you know, the way the Australian car park's changing. And so, you know, you've got one small car, you've got one ute, and you've got 4 SUVs. And so the fact that, you know, they're bringing vehicles to market that line up with what people want, and they're having success. Now, that's new vehicle sales, but they weren't the only winners. As we've seen, I'm not going to get into the detail of this, and if I've got anyone on the call from these organizations, you know, thank you for publishing all sorts of useful numbers there that I've been able to draw on. But yeah, a couple of points that I want to make with these. And I mean, let's actually start with ARB and Super Cheap, where both of them just been announcing their half-yearly results. And, you know, fantastic growth in revenue. In Super Cheap's case, or the Super Retail Group, huge increase in net profit. And so, you know, coming off the back of COVID, they have actually been able to make, you know, significant sums of money. They've had a lot of success there, both within trade, but also in that consumer market. And I think that's the one where looking at what Bapcor achieved, where again, they had really strong numbers. And you know, it's highlighted there at the bottom, did that actually without any government support. And so they've been able to move away from that really early. But another thing they call out is that they really grew their online channel. And so that, you know, that sort of DIY consumer, there's been, you know, everything we're seeing is there's been a lot of that activity going on. Question now is what that's going to look like going forward. But, you know, people have been very active there. And look, also from a workshop perspective, so the return of the Great Aussie Road Trip, borders are closed, people can't go overseas, they can't necessarily go interstate. And so they have looked at where they can go. I mean, I'm in Sydney. There's a whole lot of people I know who've been, you know, traipsing off up the coast. Before they do that, they want to make sure that their vehicle's been serviced. They might want to, you know, get some accessories or stock up on, you know, whatever, you know, they might need for that trip. And so again, the conversations that we have with workshop operators, with parts retailers, is that they've seen that flow through, and whether it be online or in store, that, you know, that was a trend they saw through the last year that we are hoping will continue over the next 12 months. But that leads us in quite nicely and saying, well, okay, what are we seeing over the year ahead? Well, jump in. Now, with this, I've moved away from new car sales. We have a whole different range of indicators that we can again call on here. And so I've started off just looking at consumer and business confidence that, as you can see, we've been monitoring them through the course of the pandemic. And what we can see for both of them is that as of probably the back end of last year, once we started coming out of the worst of the lockdowns and all the conversations about vaccines started becoming a bit more concrete and a bit more substantial, the confidence picked up again. And so both consumers and businesses were starting, by November last year, were starting to feel better about the world. Now, in terms of the numbers here, basically a number above 100 is good. That's what we like to see. Obviously, the lower it is, the worse it is. And so you can see that, and that's been maintained through. The other interesting thing to note, though, is that we see that consumer confidence in particular dipped a little bit in January. And so if we think back and say, well, okay, back end of December, and you sort of had, again, some outbreaks. You had the issues up on the northern beaches in New South Wales. And so what we need to be conscious of is that consumer confidence is fragile. And so people can get a little bit twitchy if something happens that they're a bit uncertain about. And so trying to support them and support businesses as best possible is really important. Now, looking specifically at businesses, we've been running a small business tracker through since April last year. And what we saw in December was that the level of JobKeeper usage was down to 19%. So whilst we peaked in sort of July, August, almost half of the businesses we spoke to were receiving JobKeeper to help them support their employees. That had reduced substantially by December. I mean, our estimate is that, start of the new year, obviously the system changed a bit. It's probably down around the 15% mark. So yes, there are still businesses that need that support. There are still businesses that are struggling, but the vast majority of them have been able to recover to at least a certain extent. So very positive from that perspective. And again, in line with that, businesses are doing better, they've got more work on, and so they need staff to do that work. And so the two charts we've got here, the first one looking overall, this is us just pulling data from Seek and saying how many listings are there? And then let's break them down by the different categories they fall under. So overall, and I've only shown this back to October. We do have the data going back through most of last year. That number of 168,000 odd in early February is higher than it's been through all of that period. So there are a lot of businesses that are hiring at the moment. The bottom line there is trade and service jobs. And so again, the same story. So this is something that we are seeing consistently, that there are businesses that need to hire. Now, that takes us to another challenge, which is actually finding the right people, and which we know in the automotive space has been, finding qualified technicians is hard and continues to be a challenge, and something that we will need to work on, but is particularly difficult at this moment in time. And so for those of you who are hiring, please do stick with it. Hopefully you'll get there in the end. But definitely in terms of what's going on in that business mindset, very positive. And similarly, businesses are confident. They might have been putting off their spending. They are now increasingly ready to start spending. And so in this case, looking at, bringing new vehicles into their fleets. And so, that's something that they are, as I said, increasingly likely to do. From a, servicing and maintenance perspective, we know that not all of them buy new. So there are fleets who are buying used vehicles. And so there's that opportunity to help them support their fleet, or where there's an existing relationship, they're replacing assets or whatever the case might be. What's also important to note is that whilst people are more confident and our people are looking to spend, they won't necessarily be able to get what they want to buy. New vehicle production shut off during the pandemic to a greater extent. And whilst a lot of the manufacturers are looking to ramp that back up, as you can see from this chart, which the guys at Dardium Insights who are linked in with Pickles, so they've got a good sense of what's going on in the market, have put together. But you can see that for most markets, their production is still well below what it was pre-pandemic. And so for a lot of people, if someone walks into a dealership tomorrow, they cannot necessarily get a vehicle. All of the vehicles that might be coming off a ship in 30 days' time are already allocated to other customers. And so, from the new vehicle side of things, that is a challenge that dealerships are going to be facing through this year, and that is going to, again, just challenge them and in terms of being able to meet customer needs. So, can't get a new vehicle. A lot of people will swap that and say, well, okay, we're going to go and get a used car instead. again, the team at Dardium, they see a lot of pricing information. That's what they do. And looking at the level that that's sitting at, that from the start of the pandemic to basically, start of January this year, used vehicle prices are on average 140% of what they were previously. So that demand for that, 3-year-old ex-fleet Hilux is insanely high. Now, again, from a workshop perspective, that's really positive, because if people are buying, demand's high because people are buying them. If people are buying used vehicles, they have very little connection to a dealership. And so, let's go get their servicing, let's go get their servicing, their maintenance, their tires, so on and so forth. So look, again, this is a trend that they are predicting will continue through this year. And so we're not expecting that to change significantly. So that's this year. But looking a bit further out, and I mean, there's one topic in particular that I've called on here, and that's really just because it, through the start of this year, I think it has picked up a fair bit of media attention. And so what I wanted to do was just look at it pragmatically and say, well, okay, realistically, what do we think where do we think it's at? That's the transition away from the internal combustion engine. So the end of petrol and diesel, because we're all going to be moving to battery powered cars. And headline I picked up in the New York Times a couple of days ago, Shell has said globally that they reckon we've hit peak oil. From here on out, their production is going to decline. They will continue to shift. I think they've committed to moving to being carbon neutral by a certain date. It's going to be a fair way out given their Shell. But this is a trend that is happening at a global level. But within Australia, it's going to be a lot slower. And it's very easy to go and find a fairly inflammatory headline about this, but the reality is that there are a lot of overseas markets that are pushing much harder towards electric vehicles, towards hybrids than we are locally. And particularly obviously with the recent change of government in the US, that policy has changed substantially too. And so the US, so Europe's been in that space for a fair while now. The US is going to push hard there as well. And so, in terms of where the vehicles go, if there's incentives, if there's support, if there's requirements, then OEMs are going to be pushing into that space. So, in terms of what we're going to see in the car park, you're going to be getting a whole lot of diesel Hiluxes for a fair while yet. So even when the vehicles start coming into Australia, it will take time for that car park to shift over. So we are looking further out into the future. Our view on this is based on the current climate, that it is actually going to be the manufacturers who are going to drive that process, because ultimately they're not going to be making petrol or diesel vehicles anymore. They will be shifting across to electric. As you can see, there is a whole range of significant manufacturers who have made these commitments. But at the same time, I mean, that's on a timeline out to 2050. So, we will see that accelerate. It will happen. It is something we need to consider. It's something we need to prepare for, but it's not something that we need to be, just changing over the entire shop right at this moment in time. This is about planning for that medium to longer term future. So let me flick back to Leslie. And as I said, just pulling together some thoughts on how you might actually use this.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben. That was fantastic. That was a whirlwind ride through 2020, wasn't it? The year that was. Just want to finish off on this slide before we take a few questions. So get your questions typed in, guys, while I'm talking to this one. Just a sense of what we're getting on the ground, both from our field officers and also from our regular member feedback about what the data means, but also mixed with some on the ground intelligence. So really are encouraging workshops in particular to be talking to everyone about whether or not they're going on a road trip. And certainly the sweet spot's going to be before the next lot of school holidays, the Easter period. So now is a good time to say you're probably not doing that international trip. If you're going on a road trip, bring your car in. And designing special services. Let me do some kind of essential service just to make sure that you are safe and that the car keeps going. Ben's already mentioned the enormous uptake in used cars, and I think it's a good time even to be putting on the bottom of the invoice, did you buy a new second-hand car? Can I please have a look at it? Let me have a chance to do a safety check and do a prognosis for you. I'll estimate what the vehicle costs are going to be over the next 12 months. Have a look at the tyres. We are hearing that there is a high level of consumer confidence. There is some additional discretionary spending in some sectors. So if you manage to keep keep being employed over the COVID period, there is increased discretionary spending, and now is a good time to be selling up. So where you would normally say your tyres need replacing in the next 6 months, now is a chance to say, would you like to do that now? Because there is some additional cash that people have not spent, certainly haven't spent it on petrol. So now is a good opportunity to bring forward some of the discretionary items. So selling up is a good idea. Look, I think it's really important that we remind consumers that workshops are full. Many of our workshops are now booked 3 to 4 weeks in advance. So now is the time to make sure that those automated messages are going out to say, don't lose your spot. You've got a car booking for a service or a repair. If you're unable to make that, please call me because someone else does want your slot. Really interesting thing happened over the last 5 days of shutdown in Melbourne. Workshops were very busy. So we had people who were booked in for a 3-week period who didn't want to lose their slot. And some of us saying, well, if I'm going to be home for the next 3 working days, could you please service my car? So we need to make sure that we're encouraging consumers and car owners to keep talking to us because we don't want any spaces. We are hearing some news of parts supply shortages, most of them OEM. I'd be interested in your feedback, but so far what we're hearing is that there are some OEM shortages, particularly European parts. So just keep that in mind with some of the forward scheduling. Of course, we're very happy to assist our OEM partners by providing them with good quality fit for purpose parts, but the branded parts are beginning to slow down the process. So look, it's just something worth keeping in mind, not necessarily, I think, at a crisis point, because it's very patchy, as indeed some of the results that Ben has been showing you. So look, really, it's an interesting story. I think that 2020, what happened, and of course we are still living it, gives us a mixed bag of results. I'm just going to have a look at a couple of questions, Ben, if that's all right. I've got a couple of my own as well. And a reminder to people that you will get a copy of this presentation, so no need to be quickly jotting down. I've got a question from Greg asking about whether or not we have production data for Thailand. Ben, is that something we might keep?
Yeah, look, that's a good question, Greg. I'll need to take that one and just see what I can find. It's as I said, I mean, I've sort of borrowed that slide from the guys at Dardium, and so I just need to go back and see what's available. But yeah, see what we can do.
Ben. Look, I think the other issue that we'd like to kind of remind AAA members is that we have a lot of data now, and we do from time to time offer a service where we're able to deep dive. So we've got good data sources, and if you want to know something specific that we're not publishing, you can ask us. And if the service entails digging into the data we've got, it's a free member service. So we do get those on a regular basis. Ben, what are some of the more recent inquiries we've had from AAA members?
Yeah, so look, as I mentioned, I mean, obviously there's questions around alternate fuels and how the market's shifting there. And so look, with these things, I think there's always data that you can go and find yourself. I mean, probably where I'd say we're able to go a bit deeper is you look at the ABS, they will tell you dual fuel vehicles, which covers hybrid, but also covers LPG and petrol. Whereas some of the data sets we use, we can actually split out, electric, plug-in hybrid, and just get that greater level of detail there. Another one that's really popular, and again, touching on in there, 4-wheel drive, being able to look at the split within certain vehicle models, vehicle types. So yeah, definitely two that come to mind recently.
Mm-hmm. So if we are publishing data, and we do it regularly in our dashboard, and you can see in your members section the industry snapshots, is there something else that occurs to you? So for example, we might publish the top 20 models. You might want the next 20. All you have to do is get in touch with us either here at head office or through Rob Johnson or Nigel Bishop or Mike Smith. Just have a chat with them, and we'll have a chat with Ben's group about fulfilling that. We can often give you this data within 48 hours if we've got it on hand. Ben, I've got a question about the Australia-Chinese relationship. And I think this is really, Bob's asking a question about parts supply here, about we need to be diversifying our supply base. I don't know if you've got any specific data on that, but I think you're right, Bob. I think the crisis that we've had with China in 2020 has indicated to us as a country about our reliance on China-Australia trade. I think there's another issue here too, Bob, about revisiting our whole lean, don't hold much stock. Because I know that the workshops that have got a bit more stock, particularly in areas like filters, are actually doing a little better, particularly with some of the, as I mentioned, the European brands. So I think there are some issues there about supply certainty and about diversifying our base. But I think your premise is right, unless you've got anything to add, Ben.
Oh, look, just very quickly, and I think it's work that will be sort of coming into the market soon. That we've been doing some work with AAA around the four-wheel drive market. Just more a comment on I guess what we're seeing from the manufacturers and the businesses in that space is that there does seem to be an appetite to try and increase the amount of local manufacturing and local production. And so, I mean, that's a really interesting one. I think probably two of the big factors that are going to be driving that for me will be the Australia-China relationship, but then also the supply chain challenges that businesses have faced over the past 12 months. Yeah. So yeah, interesting to see whether that actually comes to fruition. There's obviously cost and various other factors at play there, but it does feel like there's more of an appetite for it than there was previously.
Yes, yes. I've got a question from Tim. It's a lengthy one, Tim, so I'll read that one in a moment. But while I'm doing that, Ben, perhaps you could just cover some of the data sources that we're subscribing to on a regular basis, so that if you do ask us a question, you offline, if there's some data that you want, it'd be good to get a sense of where we're getting our data from.
Yep, definitely. So look, there's primary data that we use. So as many of you might be aware, we run surveys on behalf of the AAA, and so there is information that's captured within those that we're able to tap into. As ACA, I mean, some of the data that I used in this pack has also come from our own survey. So just building on that and I guess a broader pool that we've got there. And then also a range of secondary sources. So as I mentioned, we subscribe to the ABS's data around motor vehicle, the car park and motor vehicle usage, VFACTS, which gives us new car sales. And then also we have car park data through Tech Alliance. And so obviously a lot of you will, most of you I assume, will know the TechDoc system. So feeding into the back of that, they can also use that to put together a view on the car park that gets down to a really granular level in terms of, a lot of the sort of under the hood functionality or that sort of thing. And so that's where we're able to go quite deep and do some interesting analysis into what's going on.
Thanks, Ben. And it's really a comment from Tim Lennon about that the media is fixated on electric vehicles when in fact the momentum is likely to be far more behind hybrids than full electric, and that is likely to disrupt the journey to full EV. And Tim, we could not agree with you more. And we're going to be doing a little bit more data on this because I get a news feed as you do, I'm sure, and there is a great deal of hype which is not really proven by the data. And the data is showing us massive increases of 100 and 150% when we're working off a very small base. So I think one of the advantages that we have with the data sources that Ben just spoke of is an ability to inject into this conversation some common sense, because you're absolutely right, Tim, there's no point for us all gearing up to be prepared for a future which is not going to happen, and not going to happen in the way that it's been oversimplified in the media. So I certainly take your comment, and thanks for forwarding it on. Well, it is 12:59, people, so I think I might round up. Can I say, I've got a quick question here, Ben, about can you get Tesla sales?
No, Tesla do not report sales into VFACTS. They're the only major manufacturer who don't. What we do have in the car park data through Tech Alliance and actually through the ABS, and we're in the process of updating that, is you can see how many Teslas there are registered in the car park. So, it's slightly in arrears, but it does give us a view on how many are they selling, how many of the, now that they brought the Model 3 in, how successful has that been?
Yeah, I've got that recent spreadsheet from you, Ben. Bob, I'll send that on to you. Nathan, thanks for your question about skilled tradespeople. Can you drop me an email? I'm just Lesley, Lesley, aaa.com.au, and we'll be happy to answer that one offline. So can I round up by saying thank you to Michelle Bazzuti, our events manager who organised this. Thank you so much, Ben Selwyn. That was terrific. That was absolutely terrific. And thank you all for having lunch with us. I hope to see you again next time. And in the meantime, good luck. Keep on selling. See you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.